Well, it's 11 a.m., so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the webinar, All the Dirt on VCI, your secret weapon to reduce rust and increase sales. So I'm Kristen. I'm the project manager here at ARMOR Protective Packaging, and it's my voice that you're going to hear for the next 30 minutes. And my co-host today is Ryan. He's the one who's going to be manning that questions box. Anytime you have a question throughout this presentation, feel free to type it in the box to Ryan and he'll answer you. And it's also the spot where you can answer any questions that I ask of you. So for some of you, you might know ARMOR really well, but for other of you, you might need a little reintroduction to ARMOR right now. So many of you in distribution don't physically make a part, so you know that your reputation and your word is incredibly important. And at ARMOR, while we do manufacture something, we also know that our purpose is to protect your brand, or your customer's brand, your part, and most importantly, your reputation and your customer's reputation. And how we do it? Well, it's our thing. We manufacture clean, safe, and easy rust removal and rust prevention products. We call ourselves the ERADICATORs of Rust. And you're going to hear a lot about rust today. Our weapon to fight rust, which we'll discuss in more detail, is that first bullet point on your screen. It's VCI, or Vapor Corrosion Inhibiting Nanotechnology. And I'll refer to it today as VCI, I'll refer to it today as rust prevention, I might refer to it as corrosion management, but we're talking about vapor corrosion inhibiting nanotechnology. We also have a rust remover, so if you've shopped in Home Depot or AutoZone and Canadian Tire, you might have seen Metal Rescue Rust Remover Bath. It's in 9,000 retail locations throughout the United States and Canada. But what you might find most interesting today is that second bullet point from the bottom of your screen, which is that over 90% of Fortune 500 industries rely on ARMOR products. So today, we're going to break down the webinar into three different categories. The first category that we're going to talk about is how to find and diagnose rust. The second category that we're going to talk about is a little bit about VCI and how to use VCI to prevent rust. And then last, we're going to talk about, well, how do you generate new business and how do you increase sales? So now a little science time. So take a moment right now and think about your customers, the customers whose brand and parts you are protecting. So in the comment section, if you have ever sold any type of packaging to a customer that's shipping or working with metal, just type the word yes. So my question to you again is, any type of packaging to a customer that was working with or shipping metal, type yes. I see a lot of yeses coming through. So if you're doing that, your customer, they know this slide, because for corrosion to happen, you only need three things. You need metal, you need air, and you need moisture. So I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to give you what I like to call the project manager or maybe sales guy or girl understanding of the different forms of rust. But if you really want to go deep into the technical side of rust, or you have a specific rust problem that one of your customers is talking with you about, that at any point, just type that in the box to Ryan and say, hey, I need to be connected with my ARMOR's technical rep to talk about this type of rust problem, or he can connect you with a specific technical training webinar. But I'm going to give you just enough information to feel comfortable diagnosing rust when you're with your customers. So the picture on your screen on the right-hand side, this is what we call red rust. And red rust is the most common type of rust you'll see because it's the type of rust that's on your car. It's the type of rust where you see some metal that's laying in the field. And the reason that's because it's rained on it. For red rust to happen, you need high oxygen and high exposure to water. Now we have brown rust, and we call this ferric oxide, which just means that for brown rust, the metal is exposed to high oxygen but low moisture. And you will normally see brown rust on an in-process part. So if you think about like coolant gone bad, that's kind of a clue for you. Or maybe if you see thumbprints on a part, that's a clue for you to tell your customers, oh, you're having brown rust. That means you're having some type of contaminant on your metal because you're having high oxygen, low moisture, and ferric oxide rust on your part. Now, another common form of rust we have is yellow rust. And some people call this yellow-orange or orange rust. It means that there was incredibly high moisture on the part. So usually you see yellow rust when you either have standing water or a part that was washed but not fully dried. And kind of that telltale sign of rust, if you look at that picture, it looks like the rust is dripping down the part. And that means that your customer is having yellow rust. And then you also could find multiple forms of corrosion on one single part. So take a look at that picture. For brown rust, you've got that low moisture content, atmospheric rust. But then if you look in the middle, you have black rust. So if your customer says to you, that rust looks black to me, that just means that it was having low oxygen content, or just an easy way to think of it is you probably had either wet paper or maybe some type of wet film resting tightly against that metal. And then look at the far hand side of your screen, you see that yellow rust, which is again, that high moisture rust. And now that you know that there's different types of rust, one thing that you want to be able to share with your customer, or maybe what are those top 5 reasons why their metal parts are rusting during shipping and storage. The number 5 reason for rust is improper usage of VCI. So in that picture on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that the VCI is wrapped around the cardboard box instead of next to the part. And when we get to that slide where I talk about how VCI works, you'll wonder, well, why would anyone have put it on the outside? If you look at the picture at the top, the customer hasn't fully closed the VCI, which is also important when working with ARMOR Poly VCI. So what we have for you is what we call a VCI usage guide. If you are interested in receiving an ARMOR VCI usage guide, just type that in the box to Ryan and say, hey, send me a usage guide, and we'll make sure that we get that out to you. The number 4 reason that your customers might be seeing rust is condensation and humidity. And it's pretty straightforward when we think about condensation in the environment. We know that the more humid the area is, the more humid the rust is. But what we sometimes forget to share with our customers is it's not just the environment they're working in, but it's also the condensation and humidity inside of the packaging. So I want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine stackable trays. So those returnable trays that can be stacked on top of each other. And whatever your returnable tray usually has is a handhole, a place where someone can grab that returnable tray. Now, when you stack 5 or 6 of them up on a pallet together, all those handholds together make what's called a chimney effect, which just means that during packaging, the airflow inside those handholds can move up and down, making humidity and condensation and then rust on those parts. A quick, easy fix for you to share with your customers is just to take a piece of ARMOR wrap and stick it in between each layer of the returnable tray, or just even easier, grab some ARMOR wrap and just shove it right down into that chimney effect to block the airflow. So the number 3 reason that your customers might be having rust on metal parts during shipping and storage is handling. So remember I talked earlier about brown rust, and that's that rust that comes from contamination. You can see in that picture what looks like a thumbprint. It is a thumbprint. That's the brown rust. And an interesting fact that you can share with your customers is that women's hands are more acidic than men's hands. So maybe all of a sudden they're having a new rust issue, and that's because they have a new person who's on the line in the plant. So we always want to remind your customers to have gloves on when they're working with metal, and also change those gloves out, because we know that a pair of dirty gloves could be even worse than hands. The number 2 reason, we're back to seeing that yellow rust we learned about earlier, is that you have metal parts that are coming out and being packaged before they're completely dry. So if your customer says to you, we have this rust that's dripping down our parts, then you would know that they're probably having packages, or they're probably having parts packaged before they're completely dry. So you do have the ability to tell your customer to have them force dried, air dried, or put them in a wire basket. And if they can't do any of those, you can talk with them about ARMOR VCI Smarty Packs, which is a combination of VCI and desiccant to absorb that moisture. And then the number one reason that metal parts rust during shipping and storage that we want you to share with your customers are dirty conditions. And what do I mean by dirty? I mean unclean workspaces, I mean dirty cleaning solutions, and swarf. So if you don't know what swarf is, if you think about a piece of wood that's being cut, we all can visualize what sawdust is. Well, metal has something as well, and that metal carbon dust is just called swarf. But the tricky thing about swarf is it likes to form galvanic corrosion cells, and just a fancy way to say it likes to cause corrosion or rust underneath the other metal parts that it lands on. So you want to remind your customers about swarf. You also want to remind them that they need to be changing their cleaning solutions and part baths. So we know that part baths need to have a specific pH, or just a fancy term, a specific titration. But sometimes our customers forget that you need to change that. And the best analogy I have is when I'm cooking dinner at my house for a family of 4 and everyone brings their plate over to the kitchen sink, I fill it up with water one time and I rinse those plates off. And it's good, and I'm done. But when I have Thanksgiving dinner and I have grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles and everybody over, when I rinse about 10 plates off, I look down at my water and it's disgusting. It's not doing its job anymore. And the same thing happens with cleaning baths and solutions. So I have shared now a lot about rust in terms of the multiple forms of corrosion and how your customers might have rust. But I think the most important question that we need to ask ourselves is, why care about corrosion? Or why should our customers care about corrosion? And sometimes you say that, yes, while the quality manager might care a lot about corrosion, other people in the company have said to you, oh, we have rust, we have corrosion, it's just a part of working with metal. And for those people, I would think of this analogy. If I went to a restaurant and the person who owned the restaurant said, you know, yeah, we do have a little bit of food poisoning, not much, a little bit of food poisoning, but it comes with working with food, I would never eat there again. So it's important to remind our customers that they don't have to accept corrosion, just like we wouldn't accept food poisoning. And it's your job and my job to help them understand not only is it because of their reputation, it's also because rust costs a whole lot of money. We call this, what's on your screen right now, is the rust iceberg. So look at the top. Just like an iceberg, it's not what's sticking out of the water that's going to sink the ship. It's the huge iceberg underneath. That's what's going to sink the ship. So up top, we know those costs. We know sorting and reworking. But if you look at the bottom, there's one in particular that I want to talk about today, and that is an 8D meeting. So if you are not familiar with what an 8D meeting is, it's just a common term in the automotive industry for the 8 disciplines it takes to fix a problem. And the idea behind that 8D meeting is you need to identify, correct, and eliminate a reoccurring problem. So here's an example of what might be taken to an 8D meeting, which is, if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, we have 25% of our parts being rejected. If you look at the left-hand side of your screen, at first you might say, okay, $1 a part, we've got 50,000, 25% are rejected, we've got a $12,000 or so situation. But what we learned through the 8D meeting is that no, it costs a lot more. There's customer communication, there's reworking, there's internal meetings, there's opportunity loss, and we've broken down for you on this slide what we would call that real cost of rust. So I'm not going to go any deeper into the real cost of rust or the real issues with cheap VCI, but we have put together for you a video. So if you want to kind of walk through, it's about 5 to 6 minutes, this entire 8D meeting, then go ahead and type into the box to Ryan, send me the real cost of rust video. And I would encourage you, if you are the person who is always asked to lower the price, if someone's always saying to you, we want it, but it needs to cost less, it needs to cost less, it needs to cost less, then I would say, watch the video. Type to Ryan right now and say, send me the link to that video. I want to fully understand that real cost of rust. So far today, been a little negative. I've talked a lot about corrosion, and I've talked a lot about rust, and I've talked a lot about food poisoning. But I'm going to tell you right now, I'm about to make this webinar a whole lot more optimistic, because rust can be prevented. And there are multiple ways to prevent rust. There are oils and paints and coatings and RP liquids. But the ones that we're going to talk about today is ARMOR's VCI. So what is VCI? So this is just a real easy way to explain VCI that I think you can use it to explain it to your customers. For VCI to work, you just need a carrier. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you see craft paper. And then in the middle, it's that VCI, that vapor corrosion inhibiting nanotechnology. And either that paper is coated, or some people use the term impregnated with VCI. And what you have then is a rust preventative material that you can wrap around your metal parts. Here's another example of how it works. So instead of paper, we've swapped it out for poly. And that poly has been extruded with ARMOR's VCI. You take your metal part, you put it into that poly bag, and it puts a protective barrier around that metal. So I like this slide because I think it helps really explain it. So you have that carrier. Again, we have ARMOR VCI. And because that VCI is volatile, that just means it wants to come out of the carrier and it wants to put a barrier around the metal part because it's attracted to that metal part. You might be asking yourself, okay, well, how thick is that barrier? Well, if you look at the left-hand side of your screen, that barrier is 4 to 6 nanometers thick. If you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you can compare that to a single sheet of paper, which is 100,000 nanometers thick. So it just shows you how safe, easy, and clean that technology is. So again, we have lots of different carriers. If you look at the screen in front of you, you'll see that there is film, there is paper, there is foam emitters, there is stretch wrap. All of those are different carriers of ARMOR's VCI. And each one of those will serve your customers' needs in a unique way. So we've talked now about VCI, and we've talked now about rust. But I want to show you something that we've made because we'd say at ARMOR, if you've heard of one of our core values, that we're authentic. So we're a combination of authentic and fun. We thought, well, how do we want to work with our teams? And we put together what we're calling spotlights. So if you remember Highlights magazine, when I was a kid, it was in the doctor's office. So it'd be that magazine where you'd be able to find maybe like a fork hidden in a tree, or maybe you'd find 2 pictures lined up and you'd have to circle the differences. We've made that for you when talking about ARMOR VCI. So the first slide is just a simple, easy slide. We're talking about what markets can be used for ARMOR VCI. And it's vast. It's from automotive to electronics to marine. If you sell to a company who produces or packages metal parts, an opportunity for you exists. But a question that we're always asked is, okay, well then who do we talk to? And as I mentioned earlier, we know that rust costs your customers a lot of money. So we have found that there are a lot of people who want to talk with you about rust. But typically at ARMOR, we've found the decision makers usually fall within the quality department or the packaging engineers, because they are that front line of rust prevention. But that doesn't mean those other people on this slide aren't important. And it might be that purchasing manager in that upper right-hand side of your screen. That might be the individual who needs to learn about the rust iceberg and hear the information that you learned in the ARMOR VCI Cost of Rust video. So this is back to like that Highlights magazine. We thought it would be a fun way to say, all right, circle the VCI opportunities. So if you look at this picture right now, imagine you are in that plant and you look around and see this, I would hope that you would start to be able to circle some VCI opportunities. Now we're going to walk through what we want you to be able to see. So the first one is your inbound parts may be rusty. And if you see that for your customers, this just gives you a chance to let your customers know that you're willing to contact their inbound suppliers and solve that rust issue before it even comes into the part. So if you see that number 1 inbound rusty part, then that just gives you another opportunity to sell VCI. Number 2 we have is an open garage door. and we see this a lot in the field. An open garage door causes that uncontrolled environment, aka just more moisture or more oxygen in the air. So a simple fix to point out to your customers is to either close that garage door or move those metal parts away from that open garage door. Number 3 is those oily RP sprays. We know that this is where you can really come in and shine. So what I would ask you to do right now, and don't worry, because it's only Ryan and I can see those answers, is if you have a customer that you can think of and you know that they're using an oily RP spray, just type oily RP spray in the question box to Ryan. He will get your information and he will connect you with your ARMOR sales rep so they can talk about how we transition customers away from that oily spray to using ARMOR VCI, because we know that oily RP sprays are a health and safety hazard, from the chemicals themselves to those oily floors. It is a huge EVHS issue in plants, and it is the #1 reason we use when we're targeting safety managers in the plant. Number 5, you might see some wet metal parts. The wet parts we know can lead to yellow rust, and then we also know that wet parts themselves can gum up those conveyor belts and those mechanisms to the point that you want to talk out to your customer and say, we really need to move away from those wet parts to being able to use ARMOR's VCI. Number 6, and I'm not sure why this guy, if you look at his right hand, he's wearing gloves, and then if you look at his left hand, he's not wearing gloves. Not sure why that is. But don't forget the number 6 reason why you might have rust, and something that you can point out to your customers, is no gloves. So just being there to remind them to wear gloves and also change those gloves out. And then number 7 is competitor VCI, or I would call that generic VCI. So let me take you back to that Rust Iceberg and that 8D meeting. And we know that rust can cost your customers reputation and a lot of money. I also want to remind you of this point, and this is an important one. Not all VCI is the same. Each company has their own formula with our own lab testing, and we understand how that compares to other VCIs in the market. I think the best analogy to understand that not all VCI is the same is to think about buying a used car. I contact the seller, and the seller says to me, I have a car for you. I just put new tires on it. And I think, great. And I go and I buy that car, and about 7,000 or 8,000 miles later, I realize the treads are shot and I need new tires. And in that moment, I realize all tires are not the same. There's a difference between some generic tires and a Michelin or Goodyear brand tire. The same is true for VCI. Not all VCI is the same. And that's why we have on this screen some customer approvals and the customers that use ARMOR's VCI. So look through this list. Look at the picture on your screen right now and think about either your current customers, and maybe it's some on the screen, or maybe customers like these. If you see an account on there and you think, I have been trying to break into this account, type that in the box to Ryan right now. He'd be able to connect you with the ARMOR rep that's in this area, and they can work with you together to talk about ARMOR's VCI, and especially the approval list for these customers. So now we're switching gears a little. We talked a little bit about rust. We talked about VCI. We talked about when you're in those plants, the opportunities to look for. We talked about who we should talk to. But I want to take these last few moments to remind you about a few things on ARMOR. So over the years, we've asked individuals like you, what are some of those big issues that prevent you from selling VCI? And we hear long lead times and high MOQs. So I want to introduce you, if you don't know, to ARMOR's Stock and Ready program. And what this means is we have about 140 products that are in stock and ready to ship out to your customers with no minimum orders, or no order minimums. And if you place the order by 1 p.m., it will ship out the next business day. We've also made the pricing incredibly easy. We've included OEM Container Guides. That's a resource we have for you. In addition, we have technical, lab, and field support, and I've included on this slide Rustom Oniels, because sometimes what your customers want to hear are just real-life examples of other customers that you've either saved time or you've saved money. So if you look at that screen right now and you say, I want a Rustom Oniel, or if you think about the markets that we covered and say, I really want a Rustom Oniel in the aerospace industry, or I really want a Rustom Oniel in the automotive industry, type that in the box to Ryan right now, and he will get you the Rustom Oniel that works for your customers. Also during this time, I'd say, take a little time to explore our website. You don't have to write this link down right now. We'll make sure that we send it out to you in an email after the webinar. So this will share more with you if you go onto our website about the products and the markets that we're in. And I would also say, and I know I'm biased saying this, but I think our corporate video is one of the best corporate videos out there. So go ahead and take some time and watch that ARMOR corporate video. So I talked a lot about the people who are here to help you throughout this entire presentation, and I want to make sure you have a face to a name and to a state that you're in. So if you look at the screen, these are your technical resources to help you with any of your Rust problems or Rust solutions. But I want you to see right in the middle on the bottom, we have the entire United States covered. So if you don't see someone with their picture and your state, it does not mean that we don't have you covered. And if the opportunity is needed, one of the individuals from the other states will come out with you to your customer. I also want you to look at the right-hand side of your screen. We have Canada, and then we also have international coverage. ARMOR has 25 partners around the world. So at this point now, we have a few minutes left, and I really want to open it up to questions. So if there's anything specific that you wanted to ask about something I've covered, or if you have a question about anything going on at ARMOR, in this last 2 minutes, go ahead and write those questions into the box. And I will turn it over to you, Ryan, so you can answer some of the questions I'm starting to see coming in.
Thanks, Kristen, and good morning, everybody. I appreciate got a lot of questions and good conversation going back and forth throughout the entire webinar, which has been really, really good. I'll start by saying we're going to send out some cool ARMOR swag bags along with some literature and brochures as well. If you could, in that question box, please put in your physical address so we can get those sent out to you. And if you're like Kristen and I and stuck at home for the next month, please put your home address and we will get the swag bags out to you within the next week. A question that had come in was just where do we stand on the coronavirus and are we still up and running? And the answer to that is yes, we are. All of our office crew, like most of the rest of us, are working from home, but we do have a skeleton crew operating our production and shipping as we are deemed an essential business by the state of Michigan. And so we have a pretty large inventory of stock items. And so for any, say, shutdown needs your customers may have, protecting their metal parts during a shutdown, or just any rust preventative needs during this time, we are fully stocked up and can continue to produce materials. Paper versus poly, why choose one over the other, came from Dewey. Great question, Dewey. It really depends on the application. So if you can think of an engine block sitting on a pallet, paper is going to act as the best VCI carrier, meaning it's going to have VCI volatilize off of it much faster than poly, and it's going to work for up to 2 years, and it's going to also act as a mild desiccant as well. So there's a lot of benefits of paper. Poly, on the other hand, is going to be able to contain the area and keep the moisture out. And so that's something that paper does not allow you to do. And so it really just depends on the application. I would say on many of our applications, it's a combination of using a poly bag for a moisture barrier and then adding VCI maybe within layers on trays or within the pack in some way. So great question. We're about 1 minute over, and so any questions that I see here we will that we didn't get to, we'll definitely take offline. But I just want to say thank you for taking 30 minutes with us this morning. We appreciate that, and we appreciate each one of you as well.
I agree. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.